Good morning from Atlanta, Georgia in the United States. This is John McIntyre at Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta. I'm a professor there in the Scheller College of Business and a director of a cyber center for quite a number of years. It's a pleasure to be here with you today to launch a series of programs featuring aspects of IB-related fields, innovation, and pedagogical issues. The large number of registrants and attendees today is already positive feedback that the topic of pedagogical and virtual innovation in fields has picked up momentum during the times of mandatory virtual teaching and communicating with all of our students all over the world in our respective countries. And all of the institutions of higher learning that have put on efforts to really master those technologies. Cyber centers, of which mine is one of them, are national centers of excellence in the United States. And one of their key responsibilities is to promote the creation and dissemination of IB research that can be translated into better practices for teaching in particular. Today's effort is designed to keep research active on questions of effective and innovative methods of teaching IB-related fields. And this is a very inclusive notion, IB-related fields, because IB is a multidisciplinary field. And it's designed to really promote the methods of teaching virtually through the evolving modes of distance learning, going beyond the more traditional textbook packaged approach of really reaching to our students and communicating our knowledge. It's also designed to turn practical innovations and pedagogical ideas, as I said, into best practices or better practices, having an impact and leading to different conceptualizations of learning materials. It's also designed to encourage and prepare our future instructors to explore new ways to respond to the aspirations of new generations of students in digital education. I would not so much call what we have been living through this past month a pedagogical revolution, but rather a period of adaptation, be it a rapid period, and innovation in new learning methods during the ongoing pandemic. For us at Georgia Institute of Technology in Atlanta, since the introduction of Georgia Tech's first online MOOC, Master of Science in Computer Science, as a first ever affordable online effort, degree at scale, we have been very busy in most of our units, colleges and schools, in putting on various forms of digital learnings. And indeed, throughout the United States, since the advent of the Georgia Tech Masters of Science in Computer Science as a MOOCs modality, we have seen as many as 50 new online degree programs at scale in the United States on market. Many institutions represented here today have also been active, scaling up. There is no question that we face a huge challenge of massive transitions to remote educational delivery. This is a challenge that researchers and instructors in IB-related field should undertake for their own disciplines and should be showing the way precisely because of the nature of our field. Today's objectives, of course, are much more modest than the launching of a full-fledged degree program in digital modes. And we are focused on the very specific case of different ways of really transmitting knowledge and learning for our students. Today, we will indeed explore experiential modalities in teaching on the web. We will explore interactive modalities. We will explore collaborative learning modalities in digital. We will, of course, look at all of the complexities of remote virtual. And in fact, this workshop is an example of a complex use of this modality because we have really 5 time zones represented in the program today. We will, of course, emphasize, and this is in the nature of IB, international business, border crossing, cultural aspects. We will emphasize experimentation, and each instructor should be undertaking experimentation on their own. It's a field wide open, which really allows all instructors to really be creative. Experimentation in contents, in means of delivery, in evaluation. And more importantly, we will try to move from theory to practice, to applications. We will basically proceed in the following fashion. Each presenter will have about 20 minutes. I caution the presenters to really stick to, because we have basically 6 presentations and we mean to be to end the program at noon Eastern Standard Time. Then each presenter will have a chance to answer questions. We have decided to group the questions and answers for presenters in the following fashion. Rémy Magnier-Watanabe and Gordon Perchold will be answering questions and we'll have their questions and answers session together. Then, after the presentation of Ilan Alon and Anshu Arora, they will have a combined Q&A. And then we will move to the third set of presentation, which is that of Vas Taras and James Allroyd, who will have a combined set of Q&As. I wanted to add one more question before introducing the presenters, each in turn. I want to note, and I think most of us know that as instructors, that many students have made it abundantly clear that course materials that we use, or at least for many of us, are often not serving their needs. Cases about companies that they are not familiar with, featuring protagonists they don't relate to, simply don't resonate. And so the modality of virtual and remote offers us an opportunity to really get closer to the needs expressed by students. Students want to learn from coursework that reflects them in all their diversity in the world they live in. And in order to achieve all of these multiple purposes, I'm very happy to be introducing our speakers. I will do it just once. Give me a few minutes as I go through them. I will introduce them in the order of presentation. First, from Japan, right now, is Rémy Magnier-Watanabe, who is a professor of international business management in the international adaptability area at the Graduate School of Business Sciences, Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Tsukuba, the Tokyo campus. Remy is originally from France, but has worked, studied, and taught in 3 countries, noting that he is a graduate of a very well-known school in France, the Grenoble École de Management, also holds an advanced degree from Georgia Tech, Scheller College of Business in the United States, and received his PhD in Industrial Engineering and Management from the Tokyo Institute of Technology. He has recently completed a sabbatical at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard up in Cambridge. He conducts research on various aspects of management, focusing on knowledge management, cross-cultural management, foreign direct investment. It's a pleasure to have him today talking to us from Japan. Our next presenter, also Asia-based, is Gordon Perchold, who is a faculty at the Lee Kong Chan School of Business at Singapore. Gordon received his PhD from the University of Sydney in Australia. He's a recipient of an MBA from the Ivy School of Business at Western University, Canada, Ontario. He has extensive experience in business practice, and his areas of research include global business strategy, the internationalization process, innovation in financial services. Third, and known to many of us, is Ilan Alon, who is going to join us from Norway, southern Norway, where the sun shines and it's warm. Ilan is professor of strategy and international marketing at the School of Business and Law at the University of Agder in Kristiansand, Norway. Holds a PhD from Kent State University in the United States and is a well-known researcher in the field of international business, focusing on a number of topics: internationalization process, modes of entry, political risk, cultural intelligence, and emerging markets. His publications include many journals, such as the HBR, Management International Review, International Business Review, etc., many books, and he's currently the editor-in-chief of the International Journal of Marketing, as well as if he wasn't busy enough, the European Journal of International Management. Both of them are SSCI ranked. It's a pleasure to have him today to share many years of experience with us. Next will be Anshu Arora, Dr. Anshu Arora, who is a professor of marketing and international business at the School of Business and Public Administration at the University of the District of Columbia in Washington, D.C. She is a recipient of a PhD from the Indian Institute of Technology in Delhi, India. She has been a visiting professor at ISC Paris Business School, the University of California at Davis, Thunderbird School of Business. She also is the recipient of a prestigious National Science Foundation Award to create and establish a logistics and international trade analytics center in Washington, D.C. Well published, experienced, and she will be telling us about an experience she has been conducting in involving our students in a research conference in teams. Then we will be joined by Vas Taras, who is also known to most of us. Vas is a professor at the Bryan School of Business and Economics at the University of North Carolina, and he received his PhD in International Human Resources and Organizational Dynamics at the University of Calgary in Canada, also a recipient of an advanced degree at the University of Texas at Dallas. He teaches international business, most aspects of it, at the Bryan School of Economics at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro, as I have indicated. And is really extremely well known to most of us for many years now as the founder and project director of X Culture, and he will be telling us a lot more about that. He conducts extensive research on cross-cultural and global virtual team and crowd-based business problem solving and experiential learning. So we're delighted to have him. I note in passing that he is currently the associate editor of the International Journal of Cross-Cultural Management. Last but not least, and joining us from Utah, is James Allroyd at the Brigham Young University, the Marriott School of Business. And James is a professor of strategy at the Marriott School. He also is the Ford Motor Richard Cook Research Fellow, holding that position as well. Received his PhD from the Kellogg School at Northwestern. Has taught extensively in Korea at SKKGSB for 5 years, knows Korea well. Has been a professor also at the Ohio State University. He teaches courses on strategy implementation, international business generally, negotiations for undergrads, MBAs, and executives. I note in passing that he has also taught at the Indian School of Business and the University of North Carolina. It's a pleasure to have him join us from Brigham Young University. So basically, 6 presenters really reflecting different areas of expertise and different approaches to responding to some of the issues we have raised in innovation, in pedagogical learning through remote distance means. I'm grateful to acknowledge that we are sponsored today by the Journal of International Business Education. Thank you very much to the journal. We have considered doing a special forum issue, and we'll really get back to the presenter later on that issue. Now, without further ado, at 9:15, giving us a little bit more time, we will start with Remy in Japan. So, Remy, the floor is yours. But I would be remiss before you start if I did not mention my colleague, James Hoadley, who is responsible for holding a very large remote audience, as well as a good number of online presenters in different time zones. Remy, delighted to see you. It is, of course, late for you. I think it is, what is it, 10 o'clock, 10:15 p.m.?
Yes, it's 10 p.m., correct.
So it's late, but not too late. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, John, for this very kind introduction, and thank you, Jim, to have organized this workshop. Let me share my short presentation, looking at my options. Right, that should work now. Everyone should be able to see my screen, correct? All right. Well, I cannot see everybody when I'm sharing, but let's hope it's working. Jim, you can see what I'm sharing, correct?
Yes, we can, Remy.
Okay, wonderful, great. All right. Well, tomorrow is a national holiday in Japan, so actually I don't need to worry about being up early. Thank you very much. Today I just want to tell you about a joint course that we organized for about 10 years. I've been at the University of Tsukuba for 13 years now, and from the very beginning, we created a course. Yeah, all right. So the purpose here is to reflect and analyze that 10-year joint distance learning course I was telling you about, and provide practical recommendations. So what I'm not going to do today is focus too much on the research aspect of the class, because my co-faculty members from both Grenoble École de Management and the University of Tsukuba and I wrote and published a number of papers dealing with this particular experience that took place over 10 years. But if you're interested, I can refer you to specific papers. So without much further ado, let me just jump into the meat of this experiment. So as many of you will agree, the professional education environment has been changing for the past many years. And I'm talking here about the pre-COVID-19 context. Even before the novel coronavirus, well, we're in the field of IB. It's about teaching IB. So you can imagine that there is globalization and of course, that increased level of interconnectedness, of interdependence. But specifically in education, there is competition among the business schools. We'll see also that there are schools that are trying to increase their reach, just as airlines are using alliances also to allow their customers to reach further places. So some education institutions are trying and eager to cooperate, to offer more opportunities. At the same time, this is mirroring a rise in and more demanding accreditations, whether it's ACSB, EQUIS. A lot of these business schools and large universities have to cater to these changing needs. And of course, on the receiving ends, we have organizations and individuals who are willing to really step it up. And why not use their years either in undergrad students or as master students, and very often as MBA students? Why not use these 1 or 2 years as an opportunity to really improve their knowledge of international business issues, whether it's more from a practitioner's perspective or considering maybe advanced research later on. So here, my last point was about the growing demand for maybe professional and lifelong education as well. All right. So you can imagine that this project I'm telling you about actually took place between my home institution, the University of Tsukuba, the MBA program in international business here in Tokyo, and one of my former alma maters, Grenoble École de Management, which is, it's interesting here. Let's compare them for a second because it's important in terms of the learning that we can have from this experience. First of all, these two institutions have two different forms, two different statuses. One is a national university in Japan, and the other one in France is a grande école, which is a mix between a private and a public institution. When you think about the semester system, in France, it's a semester system. The school year starts in September. In Japan, we were on the trimester system when we started, and the school year still starts in April. So already I'm brushing basically a picture where there are already some gaps or some inconsistency that make cooperations difficult on the teaching side. One is located in Grenoble in France, the other one in Tokyo. So of course you have to consider the time difference, which we'll get back to later. In Grenoble, they're catering to younger students. The average age is 23 years old, whereas in Tokyo, the average age of our MBA students is 37. So these people have been working for at least 10 years. They've been away from school for a long time. And on the Japanese side, for this particular class, we capped it at 10 students on either side. So just let me say a few things. Basically, in order to teach cross-cultural management and the challenge of global virtual teams, we brought together 10 students from each side, 10 students from the MBA program in international business from the University of Tsukuba, and 10 students from Grenoble École de Management. And we ended up actually with 7 non-French and 3 French on the French side. And on the Japanese side, we, on average, we ended up with 7 Japanese and 3 non-Japanese for a total of 20 students with about the same number of male and female students. So we decided actually to open this class after a chance encounter of the dean of our program in Japan and the dean of Grenoble École de Management. Both of them ended up meeting each other at a conference in Tunisia about 12, 13 years ago, and they decided to further cooperate and why not explore the possibility of having a joint course. So the objective of this course was specifically to bring experiential learning in the classroom. And here I just put a couple of definitions about experiential learnings for those of you who may not be familiar with it. It's more than just learning about something. It's actually experiencing that thing. So again, as the definition states, right, it is contrasted with the learner who only reads about or hears about or talks about or writes about. It's actually living it, experiencing it, right? So it's supposed to be a transformative experience. Imagine, instead of just reading a book about cultural differences, about how to work and create swift trust in global virtual teams, why not work as a member of a global virtual team? Why not be side by side, virtually speaking, with people from different cultures and have an objective such as the analysis of a case or solving a particular problem together? So here it's about learning and putting into practice this new knowledge right away. So that was the stated objective of the course. In terms of a format, so you can imagine that we had 2 faculty members on each side. So actually, in terms of resources, and I'll get back to that very briefly in my conclusion. So we had 4 faculty members, 2 on each side, and we had 2 rooms that were equipped with video conferencing equipment. And here I put the picture of a camera from a Polycom system. Imagine it started 12 years ago, our course, and we used video conferencing equipment, which is very common and which has almost become obsolete nowadays, to tell you the truth, with Zoom. And in terms of tools, so we used Grenoble École de Management's Moodle system, which is an open source LMS. We used Polycom video conference system, so that means we had a dedicated room with bandwidth, with monitors, with several cameras. We used Adobe Connect, which basically is the same tool as BlueJeans or Zoom or WebEx. Students could use Skype, and in the middle of this experiment, Google Doc came to be. Actually, Google Doc was launched, I think, in 2010, and this course was launched in 2008. So only after a few years it became possible to use this kind of technology. But the point is here, it was a blended learning approach. As you can imagine from the setup, we had students on either side who are not mobile, connecting from a classroom. So from the Japanese side where I was located, we had 10 students meeting every week in the room and then connecting live with the 10 students on the French side. These are a couple of pictures. This is on the Tokyo side. So you see that we have a screen set up, and we still use this room today, actually, although the class ended a few years ago. I'll say a few things about that. And this is a picture from the French side. So how did it work? Concretely speaking, this is a copy of the schedule from the syllabus from a few years back. And as you can see, over 10 sessions, well, we had a very thick syllabus, maybe 20 pages long. I've never written such detailed syllabus before for the classes that I teach on my own. You will see a couple of things here. You will see that some of the sessions do not share the same date. We always have some constraints in terms of academic calendars, national holidays. There's no perfect match between two institutions in the same country. So imagine between two institutions that are several time zones apart. So first of all, you will see that out of 10 sessions, as I said, we only had actually 7 or 8 sessions together. Those that share a common date are live. For example, in the first session here, because of the calendar, that means that we held these sessions separately. Also, you will see that we have professor exchange. While the students were not mobile, because maybe on the Japanese side, students work full-time, they cannot take several weeks off to travel to the other institution, or on the French side, there's a lack of financing available for students to pay for an expensive trip to Tokyo. Well, instead, we decided to bring tangible diversity to the classroom by swapping faculty members for 2 sessions at a time. So here you see that during that period in purple, Caroline, who's based in Japan, and Harold, who's based in Grenoble, would trade places. And then we would do the same later on. I was doing the same with Olivier, right? So, I mean, it was one perk from this class that the faculty members got to spend 2.5 weeks at the partner institution. All right, so thinking about a few key learning points here. I keep my eye on the clock. First of all, well, when we started this class in 2008, between 2008 and 2009, the original focus was on comparing French culture and Japanese culture and look at what it meant for businesses, especially global businesses. At the time, we would take cases and we would have company visits with Nissan and Renault, because it was a very good example of the Renault-Nissan alliance. But very quickly, we found out that the scope was limiting, actually, our course, and it did not gather the interest that we expected it would. So very quickly, we pivoted from just a French-Japanese focus to a more cross-cultural management and incorporating the issue of global virtual teams, which had become a lot more prevalent. That's one thing. In terms of duration, we had a problem between the fact that on the Japanese side, classes are very short, but they're only worth 1 credit. We meet typically for our business school, which is unusual for Japan as well. We meet 5 times for 3 hours instead of meeting 14 or 15 times for 90 minutes. While on the French side, they meet usually 10 or 12 times for an hour and a half. So instead of meeting just 5 times, we decided to meet for at least 10 times for 3 hours, making it a double class. Why? Because it took a while for the students and the faculty to get up to speed, for the learning curve to kick in and to really become effective and efficient in that setup. So when it lasted only 5 weeks, the first 2 years, the students just got proficient, and then all of a sudden it was over. We also encountered issues when it came to trust and the creation of with trust, and that's an issue that we explored by gathering data and looking at some network analysis as well in some of the research that came out of this course. The issue of leadership, remember there's a big age gap between the students on the Japanese side and the students on the French side, and it seemed as if that we would have a problem where basically the younger students would kind of give older students maybe more talking time or more deference towards them, but actually it didn't work out that way. Actually, we saw that, picking back on the student expectation at the bottom of this table, working students really wanted to experience something they had never done before, and they really appreciated getting direct feedback from younger students, and very often some fresh thinking, which they could not experience in Japan in their work because of the weight sometimes of hierarchies. For French students, or students on the French side, I should say, they were eager to work with people based in Japan, especially those in manufacturing. In terms of technology and time difference, actually we tried to replicate that project at some point with a university in Mexico. But the time difference was too great for us to ever figure out a time that was acceptable to both institutions. I haven't given up on that. And Jim and John, I'm really interested in exploring maybe some possibilities in the future if we can ever figure out how to make it work. And we have classes on Saturdays also during the daytime, which could work at night in the United States. But again, we really have to be mindful of the time difference. In terms of technology, I have to say that things have changed and evolved tremendously, as you and I know. This workshop is testament to that radical change. And maybe it's a lot easier to actually implement this type of course nowadays. The last point about the content is the cases. We really had to curate the cases that we picked so that it could, we're not talking about just entry strategy or location decision for typical cases. For instance, students based in Europe were interested in using cases that put the spotlight on Japanese companies or on issues that Japanese companies are facing or that international companies are facing in Japan. And there are actually too few cases dealing with Japan, so we really had to find these few cases that can be used and satisfy our Europe-based students. On the administrative side, actually, again, 4 faculty members, 2 on each side, meant that, first of all, thinking about the genesis of that project, we had institutional support, right? In order for the program chairs to give the green light, that meant recognizing that there would be 2 faculty members, with the time, effort. Actually, we had to spend some money on equipment with that video conferencing equipment at the beginning, and that meant that we had to get the budget somehow. Number 2, faculty rapport. beyond just that chance encounter of our two department chairs at the time, there really needs to be some commitment from the faculty members involved. And over time, we had a few changes in some of the faculty members in charge. I was always in charge. I was the one person who never changed on the Japanese side. And I had a counterpart on the French side who didn't change until the very end because he retired. But this could be one of the reasons why we no longer have the class anymore, because the people in charge changed and there wasn't that personal connection that really made it happen. And I have to say that the faculty exchange was instrumental in having the faculty members spend time every year together face-to-face for a couple of weeks, sharing the same locale, sharing the same food, sharing the same drinks, in order to further discuss the research related to the class, but also the next class in the next academic year to think about what we can do differently, what we can do better. And without these faculty exchanges, well, actually, a lot of my colleagues were not interested in taking over this class from me. When I went on a sabbatical a couple of years ago to the United States, this is when the class ended. And I suspect that it had something to do with it. In terms of LMS, learning management software, so we were using Moodle at the time. I was never a big fan of LMS until the COVID era. And nowadays, I have to say that I use a lot more of its capabilities than I ever did during this project. So I think a lot of us have become a lot more proficient when it comes to all these functionalities. And this is really the type of class, type of setup where an LMS and knowing how to use it is really helpful. A couple of more points. Meticulous preparation. As I mentioned, the syllabus was 20-page long, and we spent weeks with my counterpart on the Japanese side and my two counterparts on the French side, really preparing and curating the cases and thinking about almost in blocks of 10 minutes for the class about how we were going to do it and what we're going to do. It requires a lot of preparation and a lot of planning in order for this kind of setup to go without any problem. And last point, grading. You can imagine that we had individual assignments, but of course we had group assignments. And the rationale was to assign mixed teams. So we had 20 students. So we created 5 mixed teams with 2 students from each side in mixed teams of 4 students. So 5 teams of 4 students, each team made up of 2 and 2. And they had to analyze cases, make group presentations. But we, of course, because of accreditation needs and requirements, typically student evaluations have to be based also 50% of them on individual assignments. So we had reflection papers. But the grading, what we decided for group assignments was that we would divide the work. As the Japanese side would be in charge of 2 cases, and the French side would be in charge of grading another 2 cases. And for individual assignments, we had an agreement so as to grade only the assignments from our side. All right. I know that I only have a few minutes left here. Well, what can I say? In conclusion, this very practical experiment to me was probably one of the highlights of my many years in the program at the University of Tsukuba. First of all, because I was a very junior faculty member, and it really pushed me to negotiate, thinking about IB, not only from the research side, but from the learning side. How can we encourage, how can we motivate very diverse students with no work experience on the French side, and students with a long work experience, but maybe less cross-cultural experience on the Japanese side? How can we motivate them and make it worth their while? We really had to think about these different expectations. And it's not a problem, actually. That's one question that came up over and over again. how did you resolve the differences? Actually, they resolve themselves easily, because typically when you are assigned to a virtual team in a company, you do not get to choose actually who you are teamed up with. If your boss tells you, okay, please connect with your counterparts in country X, who are you to say what the gender, what the age, what the ethnicity of these people in country X is going to be? Very often, it is very different, whether it's age, gender, or other factors. Number two, the course topic, right? We try to think about other courses that we could deliver using the same format. But actually, in faculty meetings, this course was very successful, and we made it, one of the highlights of our program. But we quickly found out that actually, unless the topic matches the format, are you going to come up with an accounting course to teach with global virtual teams? Probably not, or maybe with less interest, right? So here again, the topic of cross-cultural management and global virtual teams was a justification in itself for this particular format. In terms of blended approach, actually, it worked very well. Nowadays, today I was teaching a class on Zoom. This was not a blended approach. As you may know, we have entered a new wave. That's our fourth wave in Tokyo. It's our third state of emergency. We have again to teach online, but this is not blended because everything is online. A blended approach is actually mixing in class and online as this approach used. But again, nothing prevents us from using a completely online approach as well, such as today in these trying times of COVID-19. So it's flexible enough. If you can do it as a blended approach, you can surely do it as an online course. So that's another thing. In terms of technology today, it's actually a lot easier to set up this kind of courses. You don't actually need to invest for a state-of-the-art classroom with a Polycom video conferencing system. All of us have a laptop with Blue Jeans or an equivalent system. Same for LMS. Most universities make use of an LMS that make this kind of a course a breeze. At that time, the University of Tsukuba had launched also Moodle, and we were the first one to experiment it in the MBA program in international business. We were the guinea pigs at the university. Since then, we've actually switched to a Japanese LMS, but very few students were ever using Moodle for any other of their courses except the one that we were teaching with our partner institution in France. So, of course, nowadays, you and I don't have a choice. We have to use our LMS. So the students would be prepared, and you and I as faculty would be prepared as well. Faculty exchange incurs a cost, a financial cost. There's a plane ticket, a couple of weeks of accommodations, but it's well worth it. And actually, one way that we found to make it worth it was to teach extra workshops while we were there, because you notice that we would spend 2 weeks over there to teach two weekly sessions, one every week. What did we do in the meantime? It's a great opportunity to conduct research with the other faculty members at the partner institution, or to teach other classes, roundtables they were called, in the syllabus, where we would present on specific topics related to research or teaching with either faculty or students. So again, faculty exchange can be made worth it in terms of additional expense, or it can be limited. Instead of swapping several times, you can do it once in a while. It doesn't have to be every year. And last, preparation. Of course, as I said, students and faculty are more used to the technology involved, but it's beyond the technology for faculty members. You need to know what you're getting into, and that requires a level of rapport between the faculty members and really preparation when I was talking about that very detailed syllabus that is necessary in managing this type of course. Thank you. I think I'm close to my time, so stop sharing now.
Thank you very much, Remy. We appreciate it. And we appreciate you also starting a little bit early. So we do have a little bit of time for Q&A. I believe that John had indicated that he wanted to ask questions, but I don't see him on just yet. So why don't we start with the Q&A from the audience? Oh, wait, John is coming on. Did you want to ask your questions first, John? Or
yeah.
do you want me to go?
Yeah, let me ask one question, and then please turn it to the audience so that they have a chance to really probe some of the issues. Remy, you mentioned the issue of trust, and of course that's sort of a linchpin of international business or really management in general. How did you build that trust that you alluded to in your presentation in your case?
Yes, well, that's an excellent question. Actually, we had a number of tasks that were not graded, right, at the very beginning, where even before our first class session, they had to get in touch with their teams, right, with their teammates. So that means we had already paired them, 2 and 2 from either side, and they had, and this is how we use the LMS, we use the forum function, and students had to post on specific topics that they chose about questions they had, for instance, about the trade unions in France, or about, I think at the time it was called Cool Japan, when in 2011, after the tsunami and the Fukushima catastrophe, basically there was a switch to saving electricity and allowing what we call tararimen to actually take down their jacket and wear short sleeve shirts, as I am wearing right now, right? So they started basically building a rapport among themselves by asking questions related to, just what it's like to live in that counterpart country.
You contrasted the course you taught today in Japan using Zoom, indicating that it really was not a blended approach, whereas the experimental course you ran for some 10 or 12 years was blended. So most of us teach in distance learning mode because of the current crisis. What is the critical distinction, again, if you could go over it, between the Zoom approach, unblended, and the blended approach you used in your case?
Yes, well, in the course that I just described, basically every week I was in the same classroom as the students on the Japanese side, right? So one of my colleagues and I were in that classroom, of which I showed a picture, with 10 students in the Japanese MBA program, right? So we shared a location, and that means that for these mixed teams, there were always 2 co-located students. The 2 students on the Japanese side shared not only a physical space, but they shared a context, right? They both lived and worked in Tokyo, and they both attended the same MBA program, right? And that was the same on the French side, right? So that's different from teaching on Zoom, because when you're teaching on Zoom, every participant is usually at home. They're not co-located. So that means that they cannot work together, in the same room. They have to use a computer-mediated communication in order to even talk to each other. Well, in that experience that I talked about, actually we had 10 students on one side and 10 students on the other. So of course the ones that were co-located, that were sharing space and very often a language, they tended to be closer. But that was very beneficial, because that meant that it was a lot easier for students to get over their timidity, their shyness, because they were not alone. It was not one person from the Japanese side versus one person on the French side, there were 2 and 2. So I think that was easier to accept the challenges of the class. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you very much. Jim, audience, and you can take over there.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Rémy. Great presentation as always. Let me go through the Q&A. And I apologize in advance. Many of you have fantastic names, and I apologize that I'm going to mispronounce them. The first one is from Andreas Udvier. In addition to the benefit of learning from each other, do you also have time to bring in guest presenters from industry?
Yes, actually, if you recall, and I know I went very quickly on the slides, we often had one session with a guest speaker, 1 year from one side and the other from the other side. That was very important to us to bring in somebody, although, again, the students on the Japanese side have a long experience. Again, average age is 37. That means it ranges from late 20s to late 50s. But we always brought somebody from industry as well. Yes, I mean, again, that's a classic in an MBA program, but that was important. Yes.
Next from Jens Rabush. You mentioned that the format required more preparation. Some of the additional challenges while preparing this class compared to purely in-class online formats.
Well, I think it required more preparation because, first of all, it was 4 faculty members. And, you know, sometimes you cannot even agree with yourself. So imagine when you have to negotiate with another 3 people. You know, each faculty member has his or her own baggage and ideas about how to do things. And, you know, we have, at the end of the day, we need to agree on a joint syllabus. So maybe with my Japanese counterpart, we can iron things out, and then, you know, we would talk about it, and then we would have video conferences almost on a weekly basis for several weeks before kickoff. So that the presentation was, I mean, the preparation was meant to agree on exactly what we would do in class and outside of class, and also a way for us to reduce anxiety, because we didn't want a lot of you know, unscripted barging from the faculty. You know, of course, we're letting students discuss in class, but we wanted to make sure that we had a structure that we could hang on to in order to progress, you know, throughout the syllabus.
All right, we just had a little bit of a network hiccup, but I think most people got that.
Okay.
You just pause a little bit for me, but that's fine. We'll just cross our fingers. It's an undocumented feature. All right, no bugs. Beatrice Matiri asks, how did you overcome language differences and cultural biases?
Well, for language barriers, our program on the Tokyo side is 100% taught in English, right? So there's no problem. I mean, there's no problem. If you've ever come to Japan, there is such thing as Japanese English. Some students speak very well. The accent might be thick, but again, if you've ever been to France, some people speak perfect English, but the accent might be very thick as well. Very, very difficult to understand, if you see my drift. All right, so there was actually, it was fair, or it was on an even, you know, it was evenly footed. In the sense that no side had native speakers of English. So it was understood that, you know, they had the same, in a way, liability to start with. So that was an easy thing. About cultural bias, well, again, this was an elective course. So students who applied, and actually we had to interview students on both sides and make a selection because we only had 10 slots. And that was maybe part of the demise of the class, because our institutions felt that maybe it was a lot of resources devoted to only 10 students from each institution. So actually, if you ask me, we could scale it up, especially with the tools that we're using today. But yeah, no, for the cultural bias, I think students wanted to learn as much as possible from other cultures.
Next from Florian Taube, which is a question that I used to work on non-grade tasks without having an incentive.
Well, I see you're quick to pick up on what I said about, they needed to ask questions and post some questions, chats on the LMS, on Moodle. And it's true, we had a list of what was graded and what was not graded. And of course, as faculty, you know that if there's no stick and no carrot, things do not happen. Well, in a way, this was a small class on either side. And there was a lot of peer pressure, because if I told my Japanese students on my side, okay, please do it, usually they're a lot more compliant. And usually if they posted questions, then students on the French side had to respond. It's very difficult. Or, us faculty members would monitor the chat, and actually at the very beginning, we would say, hey, there have been some questions, there haven't been many answers, or hey, students on the French side, we haven't heard your questions yet. You haven't started contributing. And, and of course, it took a little bit of involvement from the faculty members. That's true.
Next from Platek Zbigniew. How old is the oldest Japanese student, and how much work experience does he have?
I've had students in their late 50s in this class. So again, over 10 years, I would say the oldest student was probably mid to late 50s at that time. Yeah. And the youngest must have been on the French side, probably 22, 23.
From Yu Jung Ha, good afternoon from Yorkshire. Good afternoon from at the Atlanta area. Well, one question, Yi, if I understand correctly. Any reason for this? You've kind of covered this a little bit, but tell us how you, from both programs, both Tsukuba and Grenoble, agreed upon this.
Well, again, that was just a chance encounter. Professor Nagai, just retired, who was one of the founding faculty members of our MBA program, was attending a conference in Sousse in Tunisia. And there was, what's his name, on the Grenoble side? I forgot his name.
Thierry Grange?
Thierry Grange, or the other one. No, the other one. Well, with a double name. I forgot his name.
I've forgotten that as well.
Anyway, it was just a chance encounter. I don't know why they ended up at the same conference. I don't recall whether it was an academic conference or some kind of university level thing. And they thought, okay, again, Nagai sensei came back and told us, hey, I met this guy and maybe there's something to it. Why not think about something? And actually, I had just joined. And I'm an alum from Grenoble École de Management. And this is, again, important. It sounds like a detail, but that meant that I was, whoa, Grenoble, I know the place. I would love to do something with my alma mater. And so I think that I had that, a lot of my colleagues were like, okay, whatever. Remy, take this one, it deals with the French. Cultural bias exists within the organization as well.
From Davina Vora, you had mentioned company visits. Since students didn't travel, did they only visit firms in their own country, or was there a way to include all students in visits of both countries?
Well, we didn't have company visits, but we had speakers. I think we didn't have company visits for this particular class. We had one speaker come to class. You can imagine that the class was scheduled on the Japanese side on weekdays. The classes are from 6 to 9 p.m. It would be difficult to have company visits, although the Japanese work late. But yeah, these were not company visits, but instead we had a speaker come to class.
Right. In the interest of time, I think we got two more questions, and I think we're going to cap it at that. So from Shahid Khan, besides case studies, were there any attachments with the corporates to understand the nuances of international business?
Well, again, the focus was cross-cultural management and global virtual teams. So we had lots of readings. We approached the class we kept the time in class when we're connected for discussions. So that means that students had to come prepared, the American way, which is different from the Japanese way. They had a lot of readings to do, whether it's all the basics on, cross-cultural management. You can imagine Hofstede Globe, communication. There's a number of classics, research and practice oriented. So they had to read all this stuff before coming to class, analyzing the cases, and discussing issues.
And last question from Rosalind Wanjiru. Remy, was there a Japanese faculty member on the French side, or were you mediating both cultures for the course?
Actually, no. On the French side, it was a French professor and a German professor who's lived in France for 25 years. And on the Japanese side, it was myself and my colleague Caroline Benton. She's half Japanese, half American. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you very much, Remy. Thank you for staying up late. It's 11 o'clock for you, so you do have the day off, but please stay well, stay safe. And
I look forward to hearing the next presentations.
Well, the next presentation will be Gordon Perchold, who, for reasons that he will explain, will be joining us virtually. So at least then I know exactly how much time he's going to take, so because he's pre-recorded. So thank you again, Remy, and we'll go ahead and start the video from Gordon.
It is a pleasure to participate in this workshop on the innovative and virtual in their quest to international, a technique adapted to this digital social media era, a method that has the potential to enhance active learning. I am Dr. Gordon Perchold, Associate Professor of Strategic Management Practice within Singapore Management University's Business School. My background is firstly 25 years as a management consultant, predominantly as a global partner in Deloitte Consulting, undertaking cross-cultural projects within 45 multinationals, extensively in their quest to internationalize towards Asia. My academic adventure began in 2012 in undertaking a PhD dissertation through the University of Sydney, addressing the mechanisms that promote vacillating or sustained commitment to internationalization to highly distant regions and countries. An imperative for Western MNCs to retain global competitive relevance as Asia reverts to its historical norm as the region that's contributing the greatest proportion to global GDP. I began my research and teaching at Singapore Management University in 2017, where I created a new business capstone course entitled The Management of Multinationals Across Asia. This course incorporates the X-Culture Global Virtual Team Experiential Learning exercise, the 5-episode University Matrix video series I created to guide students in their transition from university to industry, and most recently, active learning through LinkedIn digital storytelling, which is the focus of today's session. Separately, I also co-created a master's level blended learning course entitled Doing Business in Asia. I began to experiment with posting selected content from my course on LinkedIn in early 2020. But COVID-19 created an imperative to switch from face-to-face to online learning. I could not imagine students enduring 3.5 hours of Zoom every week in my and every other course they take. Attention and retention of the complex knowledge of international business would undoubtedly tank. There was a strong impetus to turn my pilot into production. For necessity is indeed the mother of invention. It proved to be a successful instructional innovation such that I have sustained its use as we reverted to face-to-face teaching for the first semester of 2021. Advantages of an active learning approach. If we are honest with ourselves, we all know the limitations of the time-honored, teacher-centric education tradition, one often portrayed in media. Prolonged periods of verbal discourse, often supported by projected slides containing textual bullet points and occasional graphics, exploring a series of major and minor concepts. Student attention wanders in and out, while the professor's monologue, occasionally punctuated with inquiry, progresses. The weighting of importance across the lecturer's many statements is left to the student to ascertain, assuming the student even captures all the key points. Such surface-level learning pervades education, where the student's primary objective is to reproduce content to satisfy assessment requirements. Students become highly proficient at this teacher-student dance of verbal dissemination, short-term memorization, and test regurgitation. But is this learning? In contrast, active learning is student-centric, requiring more than just passive listening. It entails an instructional method that encourages students to think about and reflect on the content, then engages with that content through a higher level thinking process. Active learning improves the acquisition of tacit or complex knowledge, where nuances and principles rather than right-wrong logic are more prevalent. Complex knowledge surrounding the distance or differences in cognition, cultures, business systems, and market economies that are prevalent in international business. But how does one create an environment for active learning, particularly where teacher-student physical engagement may be tenuous in the current era? The answer was social media. Social media is a communications medium integral to millennial students' daily living habits. The birth of the social media platform is credited to 6 Degrees, which actually only survived from 1996 to 2001. Today, the medium is used extensively across multiple platforms for connectivity, entertainment, and self-promotion, amongst other purposes. Articles addressing social media use in the academic environment only began to emerge in the literature since roughly 2009, about a decade after the social media term emerged. It continues to be rather nascent, but a growing field of research. Professors today, most of whom grew up as teenagers in a generation absent of social media, appear to be reticent to leverage social media platforms. They consider social media to be a distracting technology without its pedagogical application being readily apparent. The increased time and effort for experimentation with social media without certainty of result, together with a resistance to change to existing teaching practices, are found to be barriers to social media's adoption in the classroom. This resistance exists despite students being more familiar with social media environments than the learning management systems that institutions thrust upon them. LinkedIn is the social media tool used by business professionals. Therefore, it is particularly appropriate for international business content. Its users' profile skews towards individuals with higher income and engaged in knowledge-intensive sectors such as management, marketing, consulting, and higher education. But how does one deliver course content on LinkedIn? I applied digital storytelling. Classical digital storytelling grew out of the community arts movement, combining recorded voice with images, sounds, and or film scripting, or storyboarding a series of short messages that tell a story. When applied to education, rather than a fire hose of content verbalized by a lecturer at a point in time, it permits content to be disseminated by the spoonful over time. There appear to be no documented examples in the literature of teacher-generated digital storytelling whereby professors use the technique to disseminate the course's knowledge content, to co-create the knowledge story together with the students. So what do I actually do? Let's decompose a course for digital storytelling. Shown is the agenda of topics addressing my own course. While reasonably consistent with my original course design, created 3 years prior, I had to make some adjustments. To the left, you can observe the number of LinkedIn posts disseminated each week for which students were encouraged to read, think about, research, and comment upon. All the ingredients for active learning. These totaled 156 posts. I am sure that if you count the number of slides you use over the term of your course, you will have more than 156. Therefore, In transitioning to LinkedIn digital storytelling, I had to curate my catalog of course slides that I had generated over time into a more concise storyline. Another benefit for student learning: less is more. The course was deconstructed into parts or sections, a weekly cycle covering a topic area, then multiple posts, each teaching a concept building upon prior posts as a storyline within the topic area. So let's look at the anatomy of a post. Shown is that for a LinkedIn post that I use, which always follows a common pattern: an opening question to capture the attention of the student or industry manager. The body outlining the story, introducing the concept. An ending question to prompt the reader to provide a comment to the post. There's also a graphic illustrating the concept, in which I also embed citations, for as an image, the citations do not use a valuable character count in the body. Only 1,300 characters are permitted. That's not always that easy to compose, but then again, less is more. You can see that this post on the expat cycle of despair generated 39 comments from students and 6,884 views, of which only 1% would represent my students. The other 99% of views would predominantly be those working in industry. LinkedIn post statistics provide some insight into the organizations, position levels, and locations of those viewing the posts and affiliated student comments. It will vary depending on the topic being addressed and the core followers of the LinkedIn account being used. This account had 5,000 official followers, but you can see the reach is much broader than that. Let's look at the student commentary. This graphic illustrates just a segment of many comments associated with the prior post. I did have 3 sections for my classes, so students knew to preamble their posts with their section number to make it easier for me and my TA to place them in the appropriate class context. You will see that this student also provided reference sources for their perspective, so they scored 3 credits. I will often, not always, moderate my students' comments, indicating a like if I've read them, and occasionally, if appropriate, providing feedback. There are too many student comments to give feedback on all of them. My TAs review all comments for crediting purposes, so they can alert me if there's an issue with any comment. Sometimes after reading all the comments, I provide generalized feedback to all the student comments, or I draw from the various perspectives to shape the discussion for the upcoming in-class session. In any event, active learning occurs when the student comments on the post, as they have to actively think about what they read, actively engage in research to support that perspective, and actively compose their comment to the post. Active learning has just happened, irrespective of whether I have read, liked, or commented on their post. So what is the process for distributing LinkedIn posts? Well, first I prime the pump, as they would say. Before the first class, I will email a welcome message to my students, encouraging them to enhance their LinkedIn profile. For as final year students, they will be job searching. And also to connect and follow me on the LinkedIn account. As they connect to me, I will review their LinkedIn profile to learn something about them and perhaps provide some advice on making their profile more attractive for their prospective employers. I will also prime the process by initiating several posts before the first class to allow my students to become familiar with the post structure and process, as well as to engage with industry managers and executives in the public domain as to the opportunity for them to learn themselves and for them to contribute their own experiences. Now, we have weekly post cycles. Not all teachers have classes taking place on a Monday. Thus, the weekly cycle commences on the day of the class through to midnight the evening before the next class. The reason for a weekly cycle is to A, ensure students are prepared for the upcoming class in which we will discuss, clarify all the posts distributed in the prior week. And B, establish a cutoff every week so that my teaching assistants could create a PDF of the past week's posts and student comments. This allows them to count their participation credits, which we'll get to. The scheduling of posts. I use a software tool called buffering.com to schedule my LinkedIn posts. 1 to 3 posts per day in the Singapore mornings at 6:30, 8:30, and 10:30, allowing students the whole day to engage, although they can engage any time before the next class. This timing aligns with Australia, New Zealand in the late morning, early afternoon, and for industry manager evening time in the Eastern time zone in Americas. Sorry, Europeans will have to wake up to them. But what I'm looking for is for a few industry managers to contribute their experiences, which students highly value. Across the semester, I do front load the number of posts, partially due to the nature of the topics, but also to distribute relevant content for their X-Culture exercise. There's also some load balancing I consider, as most other courses tend to backload with content, reports, presentations, and quizzes. So my course is lighter in workload in the second half of the semester when other courses have a higher workload, which students appreciate. Of course, what motivates a student to actually engage? Firstly, there's less reading and guessing. If we are honest with ourselves, we all know that realistically, only a small percentage of students actually read the articles, chapters, and even case studies that their professors assign each of them each week. Students become highly proficient at winging it in class, and later rapidly scanning articles as they cram for the assessment. But with LinkedIn posts, only a few highly focused spoonfuls of knowledge need be absorbed over the week. Unlike lectures, there is no guessing about what is relevant for the assessment. Only the content in the LinkedIn posts, the 1,300 characters in the graphic, will be on an assessment. I do assign videos as homework and occasionally distribute printouts of readings or case studies in class, which we use as in-class exercises. Of course, highly motivating for the students is that they will receive credits for their participation mark. 20% of a student's overall grade is based on LinkedIn participation comments. They get 1 credit for basically reading and stating what was in the post, 2 credits for providing a perspective, and 3 credits for researching and sourcing material to support their viewpoint. Most students score 3 or 2 points, 2 credits per post. For those weeks in which there is an unusually high number of posts, you can set a cap of a dozen or so posts that will be credited. I also reduced the weekly class time from 3 to 2 hours to acknowledge their engagement, to make comments at times of their choosing during the week. As well as there's no new content introduced into the class sessions. The focus is on discussing and clarifying the concepts that were distributed over the prior week. Finally, students are now informed that based on data from prior terms, we have found that students having greater LinkedIn participation credits are positively correlated with a higher overall course grade. This makes sense given active learning has taken place. Thus, their absorbed knowledge is applied not just to get the 20% credit, but also influences the other 80% of assessments, entailing, in my case, 2 quizzes, X-Culture experience, and an M&C case study presentation. There are no marks for in-class participation. Students are in class and engage in class if they are interested in reinforcing their learning. Admittedly, I make the class a bit more compelling by drawing upon my own industry experiences to add color to the learning through the LinkedIn posts. After the first of 3 sections of the course, I let students know their quintile distribution in participation credits. Knowing where they're placed does motivate some students to change their engagement level. The third motivator is improving their job profile. As these are final year students, the posts and student comments become visible to prospective employers. It may attract employers to seek them out for interviews. A semester of posts can capture 500,000 industry views. Students can also differentiate themselves by contacting industry managers of companies that they are interested in and embed a link to a post or comment relating to the relevant business concept that may be of interest to the executive. Students also report that the posts and comments have been used as interview icebreakers or referenced during their interview. Note that this is a new experience for students. Not all students like it. Some students are resistant to change. Roughly 20% of students are not necessarily pleased, as you could see from their level of engagement or lack of engagement. After all, it does require more active effort than sitting passively in class and occasionally volunteering a superficial comment. So which LinkedIn account do I use? Of course, the LinkedIn account you use should already have a good volume of relevant industry followers that contribute to student motivation. Given I was in industry for 25 years, I use my personal LinkedIn account, which has roughly 4,500 industry manager followers. In addition, I do have some student followers now. Some universities, particularly those resistant to social media usage, may be reticent to allow professors to use their own account. Some universities may have relevant LinkedIn accounts with good external industry engagement. However, you and your TAs must be able to moderate the account in real time, including monitoring if there are any inappropriate comments from students or industry personnel. Fortunately, over the past year of usage, there has only been one industry manager whose comment I deleted as it was promoting a linkage to industry services unrelated to the course. Of course, the challenge with using your personal LinkedIn account arises when you want to communicate to the industry, not to your students. I inform my students that if a post is preambled with my initials GP:, then it is an industry message where there are no participation credits if they comment. There are some ancillary benefits. While I am still discovering opportunities, what has come apparent is the immense volume of data that you capture from student comments that can be leveraged for research purposes. Also, students' comments often include outstanding citations to literature that I haven't seen before and is relevant to my research interests. And finally, it is relatively easy to convert your curated volume of posts into an Amazon Kindle book and later update it with additional posts for a new edition. My book, entitled Build and Manage Multinationals for Sustained Growth Across Asia, is available on Amazon for download or shipment. Its format is advantageous for professors to instigate a conversation addressing the character of Asia amongst all its countries, the process for formulating an internationalization strategy, and the roles and interrelationships among corporate headquarters, regional management centers, country subsidiaries, and expatriates within a multinational. I trust you have found this video to be instructive and helpful for your teaching. Best of success.